All right, so we'll come back to this page in a minute, but back here, if you are new to the channel, make sure you check out our playlists. One of the biggest draws to what I do is that there is a different playlist for a different purpose. So for example, if you are a world creator and you want to pursue it, check out the World in Around 80 Days playlist and watch those videos. They're my collection that helps to develop your own game world. And also there is a separate playlist called the Game Masters Academy, and those are the longer form courses that I did some time back that help you to become a storyteller in your own right, regardless of what your game system is. But today we're going to be looking at creation in the more general term, and we're not specifically looking at one game mechanism or another, although obviously I have a preference for the NycosRPG system, but we're not going to go there today. That's not what's important. What's really important is that we get over to the ways of creation. So when we talk about the ways of creation in a role-play game, what we're talking about is pardon me for looking down, but I'm trying to go to plan B and something else here. And that is, I do want to, all right, so that was enigmatic enough. Alrighty, so we are talking about the ways of creation, and I'm going to be a little staccato on these because I want to be able to break these down into smaller, bite-sized segments so that I can put this information out through perhaps some short videos and methodologies I haven't used before. So we're going to take a look at some of those, and well, so the idea of the conversation of the ways of creation is that a game master can choose, obviously, which methodology he wants to use to create his world. But there is, right off the bat, a stigma associated with that, in that if you are a game master for a role-play game, it's automatically assumed that what you're creating is your own take on things and your own world, in effect. And the reality is that it's rather daunting to try to think about creating a world, because there are so many variables involved, so many possible directions you could go, that it becomes really daunting. And so the very first recommendation I'm going to make for the ways of creation is, drum roll please, if you are a role-play gamer and you want to become a storyteller, the first way in which you can be ultra creative is don't create your own world. I know that sounds crazy, but what I'm referring to is there are myriad companies out there that have created their own adventure theorem. They've already built out the world in which you are playing. The locales are defined. Even maps have been created that can carry your story from week to week without you having to do any of that incredibly detailed legwork. So the first first way of creation is simply to not create. Go ahead and go with the property as defined. Now, this does require some homework. You'll have to check with the property to see whether it fits the world that you're creating, and if so, where it might physically look compared to where your adventures currently are, to consider whether you have to make an adventure about getting to that locale, or perhaps they are right on top of each other. Either which way, the idea here is that you don't have to be ultra creative to get started as a game master in role-playing games if you run the system's lore, the system's story. Now the second one is a derivative, and arguably it is, while it's more common, it is actually surprisingly easier to do also. And that is the idea that you are going to string together the pre-printed, pre-created materials that you find that you have determined would be good for your story. You would just simply purchase that module, and then I'm using the term module stringing. It's kind of like Christmas decorations, where you take the kernels of popcorn and you sew them onto the thread, and each one of them follows the other in succession, and then when you get done, you've got this beautiful garland of white to put on your Christmas tree like snow. In the same fashion, a string of modules does in itself tell a story. And there are enough properties out there with the different manufacturers that you could literally build your entire world out of the pre-created modules of other people just by simply stringing them together and threading those woven paths crisscrossing across the world that you've created. And therefore the creation process is really just simply merging those mechanisms together so that you go from episode 1 might be the village of Hamlet, and the episode 2 might be the Fandelver series of events or whatever, so that you can just simply go from one to the other, and the players are none the wiser. The players are going to adhere to whatever descriptions you give them, and thereby you will look like a genius by linking these modules together so that there is no difficulty in understanding how the world works because it fits within those frameworks. The third is to hijack any system. One of the key rules of being a good game master and a good role player is to create and utilize a mechanism that I call R&D. You may have heard of it as research and development, but in the case of a game master who's working on a shoestring budget and he's simply picking up the individual pieces and wanting to put it together, perhaps you've already got an older play system that hasn't been used. Just simply hijack the system. By that I mean rename everything, reskin every location, redefine everything, so that even if you have already run a module and the players have interacted in such a way with that they know it inside and out, when you hijack a system, I'm not meaning to be adversarial, but simply utilize them for your own purposes, because it is the play of the game that makes it yours and makes it unique. So therefore, perhaps the story will be familiar, but it won't be specifically the same. Pardon me. In addition, this hijack can be, for example, there were a lot of properties made at some time in the past that were made for spycraft, which was a modern era like spy and investigation kind of a role-play game. Well, you could simply take that. Thank you very much for being here, Shaggy. Thanks for helping me figure out my sound system, because it would have been very disappointing if I did another entire episode without being heard. So thank you very much, and you have a great evening, and we will catch you next time. In the meantime, folks, we are back to the idea of the hijack. So it sounds, I'm shortening the term really to make it more concise, but the idea here is that the mechanisms of the game are not necessarily the part that you are utilizing, and you're simply taking advantage of properties that have been made and then adjusting them so they fit the world that you've created or that you are creating. That hijacking, of course, does mean that you don't have to do the work of initial build as well, so therefore it's the shortcut. The next way is the first of the earnest world creation methodologies, and that is to subvert literature. I am a big fan of science fiction literature. I'm a big fan of the grand, multi-book stories from Discworld to Dune to Star Wars, etc. The long tail, long piece story is easy to bring into a role-play environment simply by redefining the names of the people and the locales so that they fit what you're trying to tell, and then you just simply lift the story elements and find ways to institute them in the game. Subverting literature is a great theme. There are a great number of people who have written role-play games and actually run games events at conventions that are based on the works of Lewis Carroll or C.S. Lewis or, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien, or just you can pick any author that has done a series. Even the a great Isaac Asimov could be a source for an appropriated story if you ran Foundation or Foundation and Empire as a role-play game, utilizing whatever games mechanisms you choose to use. But this is a great one. And what I found fascinating is that when you subvert a literature source, the more effective ones are those that are furthest from the resource that the players might have. So, for example, if you are playing a high fantasy game, feel free to pull the themes from Blade Runner or from Altered Carbon and superimpose them mechanically into the role-play game that you're running, because it will be different enough that the players will have no clue where it's coming from, and therefore, even if they are familiar with the style that you run in your role-play games, they won't be able to capture what's going on in the advance of the story. So therefore, you get the chance to really bring that literature to life in your own realm. Now, this is the methodology that we're using in the World in Around 80 Days broadcast to date. That is, you go small, you go specific, you deal with the particulars of the story as the players are going to interact with it, literally moment by moment, just hours or days before they actually are going to play in the sessions. The advantage of a go small, go specific is that the creation is internally strong because you've just made it, you've just built it, you've just come to understand it, and therefore you're going to know it well enough that your competency as a game master will be amplified, because you'll be able to get through the broad brushes for the small and specific because you know them already. The secondary advantage to a small and specific is that you really don't need to create the grander, wider scale of the world, simply because the players will raise their eyes as they advance, as they get higher level. They'll look beyond, and therefore you'll be then pressed to build a broader spectrum, and thereby you learn by doing how to create the world so that they can interact with it. But you're able to start very small, very specific, so that you get a real handle on your own creation. This is really important when you're running a role-play game, or like I do, running multiple role-play games sequentially. If they are in the same world, by maintaining a specificity in the descriptions, you're able to keep the locale identifiable. Conversely, of course, there's the opposite, and that is to go big and go general. And it may be that you want to do a hybrid between these two, because the go big element really is talking almost at a meta level, where you're talking about the development of the nations, how they interact with each other, border disputes, cultural differences that may be showing up in the dynamics of play. So the idea here is that go big is the expansive, sweeping, I guess you would say, Frank Herbert style of storytelling, where you're painting with a very broad brush and you're describing the general nature of things. The advantage of a go big is that you are able to later kind of rest on your laurels as the players begin to interact with those forces as they gain up in levels. So going big is an important facet, and as you see when we go through the World in Around 80 Days series, we're going to be doing some episodes where we will focus on the going big aspect. As a matter of fact, arguably this very conversation is the first of the World in Around 80 Days that doesn't actually focus on a specific, but instead says there is a world beyond, and you need to be aware and prepared for it as the players develop the story from within. Oops, wrong button. And the final is to build from scratch. And there's some justification in starting literally from scratch, because that means you can build the broad themes as the moment strikes you and switch down and do the very narrow and specific of a creature or a monster, and then adjust your pattern as you see fit. The biggest challenge with a scratch build mechanism for creating your world is it's hard to realize what you may or may not have gotten to. In other words, if you have been building on your monsters extensively, you might have a large zoographical spectrum, but how does that fit with the story that you developed? What does it have to do with the local politics? Is the creature something that might be harvestable for the locals? So there's so many things that go into it. Scratch build is by far the most difficult, and that's really what the world in around 80 days was started to create, is that yes, you can build from scratch, but here's a mechanism that allows you to get the general gist of the majority of the project done as quickly as possible, and yet be able to cover all of the bases to call it truly a scratch-built world. So, having gone over that, let's now have a broader spectrum conversation for the rest of our time. We are already at the 26th, so I've got about 4 minutes left. So, the way in which the world of Nykos came to be is a hodgepodge of all of these. And yes, as a game master, I heartily acknowledge that each game master's process of getting to the world build is unique, and my assistants only can help you if it's something that's useful. So I do recommend you take a look at the episodes of the world in around 80 days and see if there's something useful for you in those videos. The point of creation is that when you are a game master, it is far more satisfying when your players are a part of the world community and not merely just playing pieces on a board. I know there will be pushback from game masters who don't see it that way, that haven't either appreciated or consider the long tail to be too difficult or too challenging or too binding, because the players have to then start to conform to the world, at least in some fashion, and therefore it is somewhat oppositional. But the reality is that you as a game master want to create something lasting, something whole that the players can engage with, and arguably you also want to build something that is easy for your access to play as possible. And so when you look at the process by which the world of Nykos came to be, you could actually point to different phases of the creation system, whereby I did Z, all of the above. I did every one of these. And so I'm not going to be building this out as this is the only way to create worlds, but it is arguably the best way to get through the process in as short a period of time as possible, and yet create the most expansive world you can. Alrighty, we are done for the day, and I want to thank you for being here for this episode. Remember, we broadcast at 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific time every day here on Twitch. And if you subscribe today, I highly recommend it. If you subscribe today to Twitch, you no longer have to watch the commercials. The mechanism set up so that when you become a subscriber on NycosRPG, you gain the freedom from those commercials. If you are watching this on YouTube, we would dearly love for you to subscribe as well, because it really helps us to expand the audience and let people know about the world. If you are on YouTube, please check out the playlists. There's a ton of video. I believe there's like 700 some videos that I've done over the years, and so there's something for everybody. But check those out and watch as many you can. My BP benefit for all of my viewers who are in my games group. I'm putting my Easter egg in here at the end of this video. So at this moment on the video, if you comment in the YouTube channel on this video, put your character name and your character's species. So I know whom I'm awarding, and anybody whose character's name and species is listed there will get a BP for in-game use. So just want to let you know that. And if you've got multiple characters, multiple comments are required. So you can't just list all of them in one and count, but definitely send me comments. Let me know your character's name and your species. And I will step that even further out. If you are a role player and you want to become a part of the Nykos community, put your persona name and your species, and I will grant you a BP for use whenever you start playing in the NycosRPG mechanism. That can be done either by visiting the Board Games Paradise store on Mondays and Tuesdays, 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. Pacific time, or by joining our Patreon support program. And any level of support at Patreon beyond the free level does grant you ability to play in our online RPGs on the weekends, Saturdays at 9 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m., both in Pacific time. Alrighty, so I've dumped a lot of information on you, and I put out a lot of information about how to be a creator. I hope these ways of creation have been helpful to you. And I also ask if there's anything that I missed, please let me know. If there's some ways of creation that you've utilized that you would like to share, make a note of it, and I'll see what I can do about including that in another video later on. Until then, thank you again. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is NycosRPG, and this has been The World in Around 80 Days, The Ways of Creation. See you next time.